presentations, and I'd like to thank Dan and RCR for having us here to talk a little bit about public safety, LTE, broadband in general. By a quick show of hands, from a scale of 1 to 10, how many people are really comfortable at, sort of a 5 level with LTE as a technology on a whole? Okay, very good. John Cheney, you're not allowed to raise your hand. So I'm Rishi Bhaskar from Motorola. Just concentrate on the first name. I got a bit of a Madonna thing going on. We're going to talk a little bit about LTE and public safety. And another quick show of hands, how many folks in the room are from municipal government, state and local government entities? So just a few. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about how we think there's an ecosystem of integration points between vendors like a Motorola, carrier providers like Verizon, and an intersection of state and local government to provide solutions, not only for public safety, but public safety and beyond, and see where we can create value add, not only for our first responders, but for our state and local governments across the board. So the first thing I wanted to chat a little bit about was what does it take to implement a private LTE network? So Motorola Solutions, as many of you know, have been sort of the industry leader in RF communications, so land mobile radio for state and local government and federal government. So taking the next step is to really move into broadband. And what does that mean? That means taking a commercial grade solution that we all know and love and creating it for a state and local environment in a private setting. So up here we have some of the things we need to consider when we're looking at a private network. Several of the items here, we'll dive into a few of them, but the real key here is to look at how you're going to implement a solution that meets requirements. So here, obviously in Texas, we have a situation with wildfires. Well, we can implement a private network that supports video surveillance to really keep a safe distance, but an eye on what's happening in these wildfires from a video surveillance perspective. So I have some items up here that you need to think about when implementing a network, but really what you need to do ahead of that is look at your requirements. So when we go into a state and local government, for example, one of the situations we've seen where we have incidents in schools all over the country. And unfortunately, our first responders come to a school when they respond to an event, and obviously all the children in the school, they look alike, they fit the same profile. So we can't identify who our suspect is in the school when we're on the outside preparing our response to go into the school. So one of the situations we've gotten into, or one of the opportunities that this technology brings, is it allows us to really integrate video surveillance from all of our municipal localities, right? Whether it's schools, whether it's state capitol buildings, whether it's Department of Transportation, whether it's buses. But really take a video surveillance feed from inside of a school that's connected to a private LTE network and display the video surveillance feed that's coming out of that school live on a first responder's dash-mounted laptop when he or she arrives at the scene. Allows us to identify suspects, allows us to respond in a lot more efficient manner. So when we talk about private LTE, we're really looking at what are the business challenges that we have today that we technically can't solve without a private system. So up here today you see a combination of Motorola and Verizon. So I want to talk a little bit about what that means. So Motorola, as the leading provider of communication solutions for state and local government, we've teamed up with the nation's largest cellular carrier and the first to move into LTE from a commercial service perspective. So what does this really mean? So what this does, it allows us to take the concept of deploying private systems and integrate it into the nationwide carrier. So if I'm now here in the state of Texas, I'm in the city of Houston, and I've got an LTE device that's on a private system, allows me to do things like prioritization, preemption, control the network, control who gets what applications, and basically manage the entire system privately. But as soon as I move from the city of Houston over to city of Dallas or city of Austin, and there is not a private system in those areas, I can then seamlessly move on to the Verizon wireless network. So the concept here is to really integrate a private system and a carrier system to allow interaction, not only give you local coverage and roaming, but basically nationwide enablement. So that means from a single device, you'll have nationwide coverage, whether you're on a private public safety system from Motorola or other, into the nationwide Verizon wireless network, both for LTE, 4G to 4G, and then also for legacy technologies, 3G and 2G as well, and CDMA, to roam into those networks with the same device that you have on your private system. So in addition to that, there's a lot of other benefits that state and local governments will get with this alliance, and my partner here, Dominic DeMarc, is going to go through some of those as well. So we talk about, deploying in standards. So we think it's very, very important that our state and local governments deploy a standards-based technology. So Motorola is leading that standards evolution with an organization that you call the 3GPP. Actually, Motorola represents public safety's interest in the 3GPP standard setting body. So we think standards are obviously very important because that enables interoperability. It enables a large pool of developers that can bring devices and applications to bear for this market. So one of the things that allows us to do is create value add on top of a network infrastructure. So if we look at LTE for public safety, but maintaining standards, we have to do things like make sure we have hardened and ruggedized devices. So when our firefighters are moving in to fight the wildfires, we want to make sure that they have a PDA that's hardened, that's weatherized, that's secure, that's not going to melt as they get close to the fire. And that PDA might be monitoring their heart rate, their CO2, their oxygen level, and piping it back to a command center. They may be sending live video from the fire back into the command center. So we really need to take advantage of a hardened, ruggedized device portfolio. When we talk about priority of service, right? There's standard priority of service within the standard 3GPP LTE. So Motorola is utilizing that standard 3GPP LTE quality of service classes, but we're putting an interface on that to allow you to do things more dynamically. So as that firefighter is moving in to fight the blaze, we may dynamically take his or her priority up and down depending upon the situation they're responding to. And we'll get into how we kind of break down that priority in a few. And then finally, the fact that we're going down a standards path, it's allowing us to get to an interoperability state where we're allowing voice communications from a P25 LMR network to interoperate with voice communications on a traditional LTE network. So what does that mean? That means somebody with a PDA on the LTE system can do non-mission critical push-to-talk into the LMR system. So we're really getting to a convergence across multiple technologies for state and local government with LTE. So why is standards compliance important? We talked about interoperability 3G to 4G, not only with public safety networks to public safety networks, but also public safety networks to commercial carriers. Drives global economies of scale. We know that in state and local government, we've been clamoring for getting on the commercial carrier path of technology. What does that do? Us as consumers, the thing we do best is we drive prices down. Well, getting on that commercial path of technology is going to allow state and local government to take advantage of that price decrease and competitive nature in this market. So we think that's really important from a standards perspective. And then last but not least, field tested performance. These commercial cellular networks have been deployed, as you guys all know, across the globe. Our partner Verizon Wireless is a leading provider here in the States, but really across the globe. So we're taking that same proven, tested technology, hardening it, making it more secure, adding features to it, and making it available for state and local government. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dominic DeMarc, my counterpart from Verizon Wireless.
Thanks, Rishi, and good morning, everybody. And again, thanks to Dan and the folks at RCR for hosting this event. So Rishi talked a little bit about the importance and the capability enablement that we can bring to bear both from a private organization building those networks and melding that with a public carrier like Verizon Wireless. And what that really provides is the ability for public safety now to have a lot of flexibility and options. The ability to have a custom-built, standards-based private network, the ability to have carrier capabilities for augmenting coverage and capacity and carrier roaming, the ability to share sites on a network infrastructure, and a wide array of things from devices that allow this to operate to pricing that makes it very economical. Talking a little bit about the coverage, working with a public carrier is critically important, and making sure that they've got the spectrum and coverage. So this is a graphic of Verizon's LTE coverage, and you may be aware that we're about 9 months into a very aggressive deployment of 4G LTE. We purchased all of Upper C Block that 700 megahertz sweet spot of spectrum. So it really gives us the licensing for border-to-border, coast-to-coast LTE coverage. We'll have about 175 major metropolitan markets turned up by the end of 2011, and we will have our entire current 3G footprint matched with all of 4G within 2013. But really, when you think about that, it's not just about a carrier network or a network in itself. What we're really striving to do is to create an ecosystem that public safety can leverage, that the communities can leverage, that really starts to build all of this 4G capability. Some of the use cases that Rishi described with firefighters and being able to establish biometrics and have those live feeds, those types of things are critically important. And Verizon Wireless in that ecosystem has established several areas within our business that allows and accommodates that. Things like our open development forum that will allow us to accelerate a new device onto our network very quickly to get that certified and functional. We also have innovation centers across the country that we work with developers, engineers, and application providers in order to create these types of things and then bring those to market or make those readily available across a host of different platforms. So this ecosystem is critically important to the success of these types of networks as well. Really, applications, though, is what's going to enable the success. And as Rishi aptly said, there's a lot, and they need to be very robust. From a Verizon Wireless standpoint, we are taking all of the applications that we have available today in 3G, mapping those and making sure that they're available for you in 4G, and then also ensuring that you've got interoperability between our network and a private network should you go that route. So some of the items like live streaming video on LTE. LTE is made for that, and it does it very, very elegantly. But a whole host of application capability and availability for public safety. In addition to that ecosystem and the network itself, we're making a lot of commitments specific to public safety, including enhancements to our networks. But Verizon Wireless actually has an entire organization focused on business continuity and disaster recovery that we provide for communities and for public safety. Example, the wildfires down here. We've brought in Cell on Wheels, our cows and colts. We've set up charging stations and internet cafes, making that available for communications in times like this, and there is no charge for the community. We do that, and we've got that across the country that we've stood up for public safety. Shared infrastructure is, I think, of great importance. We have spent billions and billions of dollars in establishing the Verizon Wireless network, and as public safety looks to create their own network, we want to be able to allow them to utilize some of those assets. So where it makes sense and there's benefit to do so, they can leverage those assets and share within the Verizon Wireless network. They may be able to share our shelter space, our power, our HVAC, and even backhaul easement. But making that available accelerates deployment time and reduces cost. Certainly, priority services, like we have wireless priority service today on the voice side, we will have wireless priority services on the data side in LTE. Critically important for public safety. Note that is not preemption or network control, but it is an enhancement that will make sure public safety can get data through at the top of that pipe and get all of that information passed along in a prioritized manner. And then lastly, the ability to really have that bi-directional roaming, the ability to effortlessly traverse from your private network into the carrier network and back so that it becomes a very seamless function. Kind of a crazy slide, but this is really where it comes all together. When you talk about a private network and how you get there, you've got a path that is very, very flexible. Regardless of your situation today, you can start now from a 4G perspective, working with Verizon Wireless and the applications and the other pieces of and componentry that I just described, and then working with our partner Motorola whether that be moving into more of a hosted core environment or traversing all the way through a complete private build of your network. We're there to work with you all the way across that, so that we ensure excuse me, that type of flexibility and enable interoperability, including the ability to interoperate between the Verizon LTE network and existing P25 architecture. So it really provides you a very elegant way of ultimately achieving your vision and having a pretty seamless approach to get there. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Robert Kovasas of Harris County.
Thank you, guys. So good afternoon. My name is Robert Cavazos. I'm the broadband director for Harris County. I was asked to step in today to give you a little background, brief information about our LTE network. Last year, 2010, in the third quarter, we began this project when some grant funds became available. We had originally applied for some BTOP grant funds to build out a wider broadband network, but we were fortunate enough to get some Homeland Security funds through the port grant system to build out an LTE broadband system in support of public safety. So to give you a little bit of background, how many folks are from out of town? So there's quite a few. So Harris County is the third largest county in the state of Texas. Last census 2010, there's 4.1 million citizens within the geographic boundaries of Harris County. And there's quite a few law enforcement, fire department, and other first responder agencies that are responsible for protection of life and property in those areas. Harris County operates one of the largest P25 LMR systems in the state of Texas. We have 86 different agencies, interlocal agreements where we provide radio services to those first responders and law enforcement agencies. This new LTE network is meant to augment that first responder capability to increase their situational awareness and ability to respond, like Rishi and Dominic said, to events that are data intensive, that require a wider bandwidth than our radio system can provide. So some of the things that we're doing, again, partnering with Motorola and Verizon, we just completed phase 1 in July of our LTE rollout, which included 6 cellular sites covering the east part of Harris County along the Houston Ship Channel Bridge. One of our main objectives is port security and providing the ability for both the Coast Guard, local fire departments, police departments, and the Port PD to be able to respond to events, whether they're man-made or Mother Nature. So our first rollout of LTE included these 6 sites along the Houston Ship Channel Bridge that is going to allow us to provide support to those agencies that are responsible for that security. So even though there are only 6 sites, as Dominic said, and Rishi as well, this phased-in approach of rolling out these sites still allows us to roam across onto their network. So should our coverage area not include the area where an incident may happen, our devices will still be able to roam onto the Verizon network and provide that continuity of service for those first responders. A couple of the other things that we're working on right now, as they said, the portfolio of public safety grade devices. Next week, Motorola's engineers from Israel are bringing in some of the first hand-built vehicle modem devices for us to start testing the Verizon band class 13 throughput. So that's something that we'll be doing early next week. In addition, as they mentioned, the P25 system through an ISSI service or similar service, they'll be able to provide that non-mission critical voice from those handheld devices onto our mission critical LMR system. Again, as we talked about, our rollout is a phased approach. We finished phase 1 in July, where we were able to actually do our first transmission to our devices along the Houston Ship Channel and the Gessner area. But again, that ability to roam off onto the Verizon network provides us that wider area of coverage as we complete additional phases of this rollout. Our next phase, phase 2, is going to include an additional 25 to 55 sites within Harris County to start augmenting that coverage throughout the Harris County geographic region. This is a coverage map of what we hope to attain by August of next year that will provide a complete coverage or near complete coverage of the Harris County area. So that's about all I got there.
All right, thanks, Robert. So we talked a little bit about the private network. We talked about the interoperability with the carrier network and the value the carrier network brings. We saw a great example of a live system here in Harris County. So let's dive into some of the features and functions that the combination of the public network and the private network with a customer who clearly understands their mission and their requirements, and what are some of the features that this technology will unlock. So one of the things we always talk about is prioritization on the private system. So this is an example where you have an incident on a highway. So this is a real live example of something that Harris County can take advantage of. So you have traffic stopped in both ways on a highway with a major collision. Now, how do you prioritize who's going to get what throughput and access to what applications real time as they're responding to this event? So in this particular case, you may have a sheriff that's on the network, a state trooper that's on the network, a county police officer that's on the network, and then a non-mission critical subscriber. So that could be a secondary government user, that could be a public works person, or maybe even a utility user. So in this event, we'll have somebody in the dispatcher basically deciding real time that says, okay, the sheriff and the state trooper are responding to this event. We want to take the dash-mounted camera from one of those users, point it at the scene, and shoot that video back to a command center to make some critical decisions about road closures or basically how are we going to treat individuals that are injured on the scene. So from a prioritization perspective, with the Motorola solution, you can dynamically ramp up priority for users that are on the scene and ramp down priority for users that are operating in their day-to-day functions, doing something non-mission critical. So that's a key element of a private system, being able to control that priority for all of your users. This one is probably, it hits home a little more. We had a situation in Michigan recently where there was a suspect held up in a compound with a lot of weapons, and the police surrounded the building. They thought the person got out of the building, so they went in. Turns out he was still in, and he shot an officer. So in this particular case, had this technology been available to the first responders in that situation, they could have monitored the compound remotely with video surveillance that's coming live over the LTE network, and basically watched from a safe distance whether or not this person was still in or out of the building. But in the situation where this person was still in the building and we had an officer hit an emergency button on his or her device, the emergency button allows you to do a lot of things. It allows you to ramp up priority for that person that pressed it, but we also know where that person is and who's around him or her, right? So now we can figure out that, okay, he pressed the emergency button, he's at this location based upon the GPS of his device, and we know the next officer is a block away, so we want to ramp up both of their priority so they can get an accurate picture of what's happening on the scene and take down the priority of the other users. So that's a concept that we call preemption that's available in the private network. So we need to make sure these two users that are responding to an emergency event based upon actions that they took on their own device, and we're going to kick those guys up and drop the other guys off of the network to make sure they get all the throughput and bandwidth they need to maybe see live video feed, maybe send them high resolution images. Maybe they're dealing with a wanted suspect and they want to send that picture to those users right away. Or someone's shooting at them and we need to hit an emergency button to say, hey, there's a situation going on that's life-threatening to an officer. All these users in the geographic area, please respond, and here's the video surveillance coming off of that officer's squad car. So there's a lot of, I like to say your imagination can run wild once you have the bandwidth available that LTE can provide to how you can roll out applications that will aid public safety and state and local government. So we talked a lot. Are there any questions? I know we're flying through a lot of information. I think we're supposed to do questions at the end, but if there's any questions in between, please throw them out. Shoot.
I see that the
That's a fantastic question. So the question for anybody back in here is, how do you manage all the disparate public safety entities that are responding to events, and how do you essentially govern the use of this technology? So we're going to talk a little bit about sort of the pre-work that needs to go into this kind of a network. And Robert and John Chaney from Harris County can talk to you about how they're implementing governance in their own environment, and how do you control police versus fire versus EMS, and who gets priority. It's all in a governance model, and I'm going to show you a bit of kind of steps on how we get there here in a minute. But we recognize that that's a major challenge. So one of the things I have up here is a continuum of business models, and so in the public safety world, we're very used to, in the LMR business at least, to be on the left side of the screen, right? So there's a big federal grant. Public safety deploys a region-wide or city-wide or statewide land mobile radio system so all the users can talk to each other. But in the data world, at least from a public safety perspective, we're out on the right side right now. Verizon Wireless sells a lot of data service to public safety over their commercial network, which is a fantastic way to get high-speed data. As these two worlds collide, we think the appropriate business model is somewhere in the middle. So we know the days of huge spending in state and local government are probably over. But we also know that you need some more feature-rich functionality from a data perspective for public safety. So we come right in the middle and blend the carrier service with the private network to give you a business model that financially makes sense and functionality rich. So roaming with your carrier, single device, hardened, secure, priority on your private network, site sharing, which Robert talked about a little bit or was on one of his slides, that helps you reduce your capital build-out costs for sites. The middle ground here from a business model perspective makes a lot of sense financially. And if there's any questions after this, we have some detailed metrics on how we think states, local governments can save a lot of money by implementing a hybrid system here between private and public networks. So to the question that came up just a minute ago, we had a consulting company by the name of the Digital Decision put this together for us based on some experience that they had in deploying the first 700 megahertz wireless system. So essentially, when we're out here on the left side, we really need to get it right from the start. And one of the things I like to point in on is something that oftentimes is overlooked, and it's really the second box from the left, and that's applications and user analysis. So these charts are available. I'm not going to walk through every box, obviously, but we'll talk about a few that are important here. But really identifying your users, identifying their requirements, identifying their functions early on in the process is going to lead to governance. As you see, the next step out of that is really getting to governance. Who's going to control the system? Who's going to have what priority? How are we going to give control from the police department in Harris County to the police department in the city of Houston, if we ever get to a point where we're covering the city of Houston? That all has to do with governance, and it all is built out in developing your user requirements and interaction amongst the agencies. So this is available. This is a lot of good information on how to really get started in your deployment. So last but not least, what is our goal collectively here as Motorola and Verizon Wireless? Our true goal here is to improve service delivery at a sustainable cost. We all are used to the days of getting grant funding. We can build out a capital system, but then we run out of operational budget. How do we can make sure our systems are sustainable? Well, we do it with several of these areas that are kind of going into the circle here. Certainly, LMR interoperability helps reduce cost. Bringing in reduced wireless operational expenses, so kind of taking those two business models from the left and right and getting to something converged will reduce your operational expenses. Site sharing with your carrier partner, with Verizon Wireless, so you don't have to go build new towers and new shelters, which is typically the highest cost item when you deploy a private system. You can use sites that are existing. Obviously, they have hundreds, thousands of sites across the country. And then, I'll walk through a couple of these. Nationwide roaming helps you reduce your cost and then improve delivery. You're in Harris County, you're in City of Houston, you're going into a building as a first responder. If we don't have coverage in that building from a private network, in the City of Houston, in an urban environment, your carrier partner, Verizon Wireless, probably has coverage in there. So you can actually build out based upon your budget while you're being able to roam to a carrier. So as your budget grows, build out more of your private network. If your budget doesn't grow, continue to roam with Verizon Wireless at aggressive rates. So we have a lot of different components in this model between Motorola and Verizon that really come together and allow you to improve service and sustain your cost. And I think that's the end of it. Dan, any questions?
Yes. Oh, sorry. Question. We get the microphone for you here. No problem. Everybody can hear.
What about inter-system interoperability? I know that Galveston County has a rather extensive public safety radio system. I believe Montgomery County does as well. Given the density of the Houston metropolitan area, it seems to me that there would be a desire to have system interoperability. Does the product address the ability to interoperate amongst disparate systems for some emergency disasters, much like the wildfires that we have now?
Figure out how to turn this on. Or do you turn it on? So on the public safety side, from a private system, there's multiple ways to interoperate. So obviously in the LMR world, we deal with ISSI type of functionality to do voice-to-voice communications. Well, the private system will allow you via similar gateway type of technology, which Harris County is deploying, to talk about that allows you to move in between your traditional voice system and the private LTE network. So there are technologies that are available from Motorola that allow you to do that seamless interoperability. So you can take your LTE PDA with the push-to-talk button on it and talk with a first responder that's out in the field responding to an event. Does that answer your question?
Also, on a larger scale, one of the requirements for the early waiveries that the FCC granted to allow the early adoption of this technology was that requirement to provide interoperability mainly between the new broadband systems that are in place, but also to those legacy systems. So one of the things that the state of Texas is going through now, which received the waiver that we're operating under, is an interoperability showing with the FCC on how we're going to meet those requirements. So.
In terms of the priority in which we deploy that network, or does it have an impact on the network itself?
Well, I guess both.
Sure. I mean, typically in our deployment schedule and the way that we prioritize that is going to really be based on population density and where that's needed. Certainly and typically when you have a large area like that, public safety becomes very important anyway. So, but typically it's based on POPs. From an impact standpoint, public safety can have a profound impact on network, quite frankly, and that's another advantage of a private network is that, if you're streaming heavy video in a congested area, all converged at a site, that certainly can impact the throughput on that. So if you've got a private network, then that doesn't impact the carrier and vice versa. So we can, play off one another from a capacity standpoint. There are a lot of benefits for that, but the other piece is that we both are very vocal advocates for the allocation of D block and the ability for public safety to have that additional spectrum so that they can have the necessary depth and capacity.
Sure, capacity is not an issue at this point, but at some point,
It's ramping up, but.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. So it all depends on requirements, right? So there's capability to provide private LTE networks in building, but if you look at a dense urban environment, private LTE system might not be the right choice of technology, right? So if you go into downtown Houston, you may gain efficiencies and cost savings by deploying a distributed antenna system on your private side in building, right? So there's multiple ways to tackle in building. Certainly, roaming to Verizon Wireless is a very cost-effective option from a capital perspective. But depending upon the requirements, if you want true in-building coverage on LTE, you could do distributed antenna systems internally, or you could even do eNode Bs in 700 megahertz within the dense urban environment that will provide that in-building penetration that you need.
Yeah, I know we had another question in the back there. I guess we have a working mic here, so hopefully, for now at least. And just give your name and who you're with, too, please.
I'm Sumit Nahar. I'm with PowerWave Technologies. Question is, if the public responders are on the Verizon network, how do you manage prioritization, bandwidth allocation, to these public responders versus the actual, commercial subscribers on that same network?
Yeah, so from a from a Verizon network standpoint, I talked earlier about the ability to have data priority, dynamically controlled and that type of capability. It is a service that Verizon will offer on their LTE system for data. So if public safety has a need for a prioritized session or segment, we'll be able to accommodate that. It does not include preemption. The example that Rishi had, where they knocked people completely off of the network in order to route that, is not from a commercial carrier standpoint something that we're able to do. So we can offer priority, but not preemption, and that is something that we will have on the Verizon Wireless network. Anything else you want to add on that?
Perfect.
A follow-up would be then, if there is a certain grade of service you're offering on the Verizon network, and being able to provide priority on to the public responders, which is kind of, you cannot really anticipate, right? How do you manage quality of service on your commercial subscribers at that point?
I'm not sure I fully heard that question. If you could re-ask.
Let me try again, sorry. So, Verizon Wireless would also have an obligation to their commercial subscribers for a certain quality of service, right?
That's right.
And if the public responders would demand high data applications that are using most of the bandwidth available on that particular site or that network, which if you offer and give as a priority to the public responders, how do you manage the quality of service on your Verizon network?
I see. Because public safety would have the option of that prioritized service, it really compresses the pipe, if you will. So because it's data and not voice, where you may have a drop, their data may slow, but delivery will still be there. And that is, that's something that we will offer on our network. We'll ensure that they won't be knocked from the network, but it will compress that session and may degrade it a little bit if there is a prioritized event on top of it.
Great. All right. I think we have one more right here. There we go. All right. And your name?
Yeah, Roman Kikta, Mobility Ventures. So my question is regarding the public safety. You're looking at an urban setting like Houston, where you have skyscrapers, 80, 90-story buildings, what have you. What kind of coverage will you be providing through the floors? And also, are you taking into account any location? So during an emergency situation, will you be able to pinpoint that somebody is on the 72nd floor or the 45th floor and so on? Does your network provide for that proximity identification?
Yeah. So that's actually, I think, a two-part question. So it has to do with the network build-out and coverage analysis based upon requirements. So certainly in areas like Houston and New York City and and in San Francisco, where you have a lot of very tall buildings that need coverage. So kind of back to the question we answered earlier, what's the requirement? Do we need an eNode B on the top of that building, propagating down, covering it? Or do we cover that building with a distributed antenna system? Or do we cover that with Verizon Wireless Commercial Service? So there's multiple options on how you can cover the skyscraper and the tall buildings. The second part of the question was really more application-based. So we do provide location-based service types of applications. So when you have a first responder with the device, you'll be able to pinpoint exactly where that user is based upon GPS and location-based services. So really what we need to make sure we all walk away with this, that the network provides, for all intents and purposes, the pipe, and your imagination provides what you can put on it.
Great. Any other questions from the audience? Over that side there? All right. You guys are keeping me walking? That's good.
Good morning. We talked a lot about public safety, so this is for the county executive. Any requirement to put surveillance and/or traffic video on the network? And if so, like the city of London, of course, is very historically noted for having cameras on every street corner. And with regard to that, what is the latency impact that you project on the private and the public network if you choose to do so?
Thank you. That's a very good question. And some of our partners here in the city include our own traffic department within the Harris County organization, as well as TxDOT here locally. So originally, the waiver stipulated that the traffic on this network was strictly for law enforcement. Since then, a second ruling has happened at the request of North Carolina, or one of the Carolinas, that asked the FCC to expand that capability to allow non-law enforcement data on the network. And so it was still a bit of an ambiguous ruling, but it kind of left it up to the local jurisdictions to decide if that type of traffic was going to be put on the network. As your question relates to the availability of bandwidth on there and introducing those non-public safety entities, some of the features within the Motorola system allows that priority to service so that we can create a band class of non-public safety individuals where we can prioritize their use of the network on their use of the network with their traffic so that we could regulate that.
All right, well, I think we're almost out of time on this panel right now. Again, I want to thank you guys for the great information today, and I know, again, at 2:30 we should have a networking reception. I think these guys might be around for some questions then, and if they're around at the end of the day as well, if you guys have some more questions for them, I'm sure they can be happy to answer those for you. So again, thanks a lot, guys, for the information today. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.